collapse is underway right now. You can see this taking place, particularly in Europe, as there are 8 Euro countries in deflation. Now, you came here for the truth, and I will unveil that to you right now. Let's talk about what we're seeing in the media right now as they continue to push out this message that everything is just fine, and then that spreads down into the general public who watches the mainstream media for the most part, and they're basically getting this information and believing it even though they are hurting in their own economy. You're looking at food prices rising, you're looking at electricity prices rising, and then they like to pigeonhole these theories here and suggest that, look, unemployment's down, look at the number, everything's just fine, look at gasoline, that's down. But the real indicators that mean ultimately your dollars that you get from your paycheck, if you have a job, you ultimately have that and you have to trade it for real goods. But it seems to me, by all statistics that I have looked at, that people are getting more poor as the years, as the decades go on. And I'm talking about real, in terms of real wealth, that has been declining. You look at a lot of the third world countries, individuals there are either very rich or very poor. There is no middle class, and that's what defines oftentimes a developing nation, when there is no strong middle class. And that's what's going to happen to most of the Western countries. You're going to have a great divide, a schism that has been formed in between the rich and the poor, and those so-called rich, the wealthy people making $125,000 a year, they are not what you would call rich, and they're going to end up in the poor class as well, and they're going to be taxed into poverty. That's how this is going to work. You look at what happened in France. I have individuals commenting all the time, look, it's just such a small number of people that got taxed. It doesn't matter. That's how it starts. The president is set to have just a small amount of these individuals who get taxed, and then they say, look, we're going to extend it on to these people, and then we're just going to extend it to just this group of people over here. And that's how they begin. Let's get into the news right away. That's what you came here for. Risks of deflation feeds the global fears. The article initially was out of the Wall Street Journal. ECB President Mario Draghi acted against deflation risks in June and September, pushing the central bank to slash interest rates to record lows each time, including a negative rate on bank deposits at the ECB, and unveiling a new bank lending and asset purchase plans for the asset-backed securities and covered bonds. What are they saying right here? They are going to do everything that the Federal Reserve has done. They're using every policy that they can to get this economy going again. And how do they do this? They initially began by slashing interest rates, and then they did austerity measures. The austerity measures caused riots to take place in many of these countries. I covered it here on this channel years ago, talking about how they're going to strangle the individual, and that's somehow going to allow the economy to rise. I've never been able to figure that out yet, but the mainstream media continues to project this message that that's how it's going to work. If you buy asset-backed securities, which are all garbage, that's going to allow people to get more jobs. I don't really see the connection there, but perhaps I'm a little slow on that. So let's go on. This is out of the Telegraph. And this right here is talking about the ECB and the OMT program. And they're saying that this OMT program falls within the central bank's mandate. Now, the OMT program, don't listen to what all the other analysts are saying. This OMT program translates no different than QE, no different than money printing, credit expansion, and all the other words you want to use. That is the ECB buying up garbage, printing money, giving it to banking institutions, and essentially getting it from thin air. They don't have this money. It's not real wealth. So how many times do I have to cover this? But here it is, one more program, the OMT. And what they also mentioned here was that they're going to make some changes to the ESM mechanism, and that is going to fix everything. The ESM, the European Stability Mechanism, this right here It's quite interesting. It's what I warned about in my book. Initially, they had the EFSF, and that was going to save everything. And then if they needed to, they'll bring in the ESM. But of course, they won't need to because growth is increasing, of course. Everything is just fine. That's what they said when I was writing my book, and I knew the future. It doesn't take a genius to have, you don't need a crystal ball to figure out what's going to happen here. A collapse is obviously a certainty when you go into these absolutely consistent roundabout ways that they are pushing upon us. They continue to print money, they continue to do these asset-backed security purchases, and they are always slashing the interest rates, bringing them down. Now, let's get on with this. The 8 countries that are currently in a deflation: Bulgaria, Greece, Hungary, Spain, Poland, Italy, Slovenia, Slovakia. Every single one of these countries is currently in a deflationary environment. And then you can go on with the next 4 countries that are right at zero. So they will ultimately be falling as well. And then you look at all of the other countries to the right of that, and you'll see that they're not really much better at all. They're all with a risk of falling into a deflation. Now, of course, these are using their manipulated government numbers. These aren't even the real statistics, but let's use their statistics and show how bad things are. Now, what the result of all this deflation is going to be? That's right, cutting the interest rates and extending their QE type programs, money printing, credit expansion. Let's get into what I wrote about in my book. The ECB has purchased billions of bonds for the bailed out countries and are now buying Italian and Spanish bonds to keep them stable. This is no different than the Fed printing billions to buy US bonds. That's exactly what I'm trying to say when you have these economies that are in a complete failure. Why? Because the system itself is set up that way, and then you impose austerity measures, and what do you think is going to happen? It's going to strangle the economy itself. You cannot hurt the individual citizen and somehow allow the economy to have its own boost. It doesn't make sense. So they create these schemes, tell you that everything is just fine because they're working on it with the asset-backed securities and purchasing all these bonds and all this fraud that goes on. The Federal Reserve, I disclosed not too long ago how the Federal Reserve is actually giving money to the European banks. It doesn't make any sense. Something else is going on behind the scenes. We're trying to dig up that information, but what I can tell you for sure, for certain, is that we are on pace for a collapse. That's what I predicted in my book. That's what's happening right now. And again, it doesn't take a crystal ball to figure that out. This is back in 2011. ECB raises interest rates despite the debt crisis. So this is, as I said, back in 2011. So they had to raise interest rates because everything was just fine. It's time to raise the rates. And that's what they were saying just recently with the Federal Reserve. They had to raise the rates because the economy's better now. Well, if you look at this, this is only more recent. ECB cuts rates and launches stimulus program. That's right, because just not too long after they increased the rates, they had to cut them down because the real economy is sinking. It's falling, and they know that. And certainly the Grinch who stole Christmas knows that as well. And if I go on, I'll talk about out of Bloomberg here. They said this: economists predict that ECB President Mario Draghi will eventually announce a QE program of government debt purchases similar to those carried out by the U.S. Federal Reserve and Bank of England. That's almost a direct quote from my book here, but basically what I want to mention with this is that this is, by the way, this is brand new information saying that, look, they're going to have to do what they did in the US because that's the way it's heading right now. There is no real semblance of economy left. There isn't anything for the bright side here. So they're going to go ahead with these purchases of the asset-backed securities, print money, give it to banks, and ultimately give nothing to the individual citizen. And here out of Reuters, crude oil prices fell to a 40-year low before rebounding, and global equity markets declined again on Thursday as investors fretted about world growth and revived European debt crisis after a 2-year slumber. That's right, everything was just fine according to this article at Reuters, and now there's a European debt crisis. Well, I talked about it so many times before, I'm sure you're even sick of hearing it from me, but that's the truth, is that we have a huge problem. Now we are seeing what's happening with the oil markets. Very interesting what I brought out with the whole Saudi Arabia thing, but I also would just like to mention the fact that just prior to the recession, and the financial crisis specifically, we had a decline in oil prices, and they went down many-fold lower than where they were at their peak. So we can expect a real drop in the price of oil if things do get as bad as they did at that time. This right here is out of Bloomberg. The central bank has been gradually winding down its $85 billion plan of monthly bond purchases since January, and it's poised to stop the final $15 billion at the end of the month. They also talked about weighing interest rates, weighing the raising of the interest rates. And what I'm talking about here is that they say that they're going to get out and pull out of these stimulus packages, the easy money policies, but that can't happen. Sure, it can stop temporarily. It absolutely can. QE1 stopped, QE2 stopped, at least on the surface level. But ultimately, they're going to have to continue. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet is around $4.4 trillion, and that is nowhere near where it's going to end up eventually. I mean, you're not even including the secret bailout that took place. We know of at least $16 trillion that was printed. We know there's a lot more going on out there. The Federal Reserve Chairman at the time, Ben Bernanke, specifically said that he will not tell you, the American people, the public of the world, where the money went. So, of course, if that's the case, if they're not going to be transparent at all, then we know that there is more going on behind the scenes, and this connects in with what's happening in Europe right now. You're seeing them having a crisis. That same crisis will appear in the U.S. because of the system itself. It is set up and designed to fail so that the elite can come in and scoop up things at rock bottom prices. They've done this so many times before. It's happening before our very eyes, and I hope that you see it. And if you found this informative, if you like these videos that I do, please give me a thumbs up. That really helps me out a lot. I hope that you like the videos where I'm getting into a little bit longer, a little bit more detailed. I hope that you appreciate that. If you do, please give me a thumbs up as well. And don't forget to become an insider. The Insiders is where I give out all my best intel for free. That is available at themoneygps.com. You scroll down to the bottom, fill in your email address, and you get occasional emails from me with good, short, concise info.